A cold wind whispered through the canyon, curling low across the grass like a living thing. The stars above blinked through thin clouds, and in the hush of that wild land, something ancient stirred. The Mustang herd had moved lower into the valley that evening, sensing the change in air pressure, the quiet that always came before a storm. They huddled close, the mares protective of their young, the lead stallion circling with restless hooves and sharp ears. Among them, a mare named Solana separated herself from the group, her body trembling, her breath coming in short, hard bursts. She dropped to her knees behind a cluster of rocks and sagebrush. Her eyes darted, nostrils flaring, while pain rolled through her in waves. The foal was coming fast, too fast for comfort and far from safety. But Solana didn't cry out. She bore it in silence, knowing the cost of sound. Predators listened in the dark. From the ridge high above, a young girl crouched beside her binoculars, barely breathing. Elsie had been tracking the herd for weeks, each morning recording their movements in a notebook, each night watching them fade into the dusk. The mare had fascinated her from the start. Solana was aloof, independent, but oddly gentle. Something about her reminded Elsie of her mother before everything changed. Now she leaned forward, her breath fogging the eyepiece. "Come on, you can do it," she whispered, though no one could hear. Below, the birth completed in a final shudder of effort. A wet, fragile foal dropped to the earth. He didn't move at first. Solana turned and licked him, urgency in every motion. Minutes passed like hours. Then, with a jerk and a struggle, the foal kicked his legs beneath him and began the clumsy fight to stand. Elsie's hands trembled as she wrote, "Asterisk born tonight. Small. Maybe too small. But strong-willed. I think I'll call him Whisper, asterisk." Lightning flared far to the east. Thunder rolled seconds later. The storm was coming, faster than expected. Down in the valley, the lead stallion raised his head sharply. The scent of rain wasn't the only thing in the wind. Something else had caught his attention. Further west, moving low and silent through the scrub, a shadow moved with practiced care. The wolf was old, its gray coat matted, ribs sharp beneath thinning fur. A scar crossed its left eye, and it limped on its hind leg, a wound long since healed wrong. Hunger pulled it forward, but it didn't act rashly. It watched, calculated. The herd sensed it. They always did. But they couldn't see it, not yet. The foal had stood, but just barely. His legs shook like reeds in wind. Solana nuzzled him, encouraging his steps, but he collapsed again into the dust. She neighed softly, calling for the herd's attention. The stallion trotted over, his posture dominant and protective, then whinnied sharply. The herd began to move, urging the slower mares toward denser cover, their hooves stirring dust as tension spread like smoke. And then the sky split open. A crack of thunder followed the sudden burst of lightning. The horses scattered in panic. In a flash of movement and shadow, Solana was pulled away by the chaotic press of bodies. Whisper tried to follow, but his legs betrayed him again. He slipped, and by the time he looked up, the herd was gone. He let out a weak, broken cry. It carried just far enough. The wolf emerged like a wraith from the brush, its eyes fixed on the foal. It approached not with the speed of a killer, but with purpose. Whisper tried to stand again, ears flattened, instinct screaming, but he couldn't gain balance. The wolf paused, watching, waiting, then moved swiftly. Not to bite, not to kill. It lifted the foal gently in its jaws by the neck scruff. Whisper went limp, too tired to resist. The wolf turned and disappeared into the trees, its limp worsening with each step, but driven by something deeper than hunger. Elsie screamed. She dropped her binoculars, stumbling backward. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to refocus, trying to trace the movement through the trees. All she saw was the flicker of a pale foal's leg vanishing into darkness. No, not him. She stood frozen, rain beginning to fall in cold, stinging drops. Panic clawed up her throat, but it couldn't break through the numbness setting in. She tore herself away and ran toward her horse. Dusty, the old gelding, was tethered to a pine just down the trail. He raised his head, sensing her distress before she even reached him. Elsie fumbled with the reins, her mind racing. She had no plan, No idea where the wolf was headed, but she knew the terrain, the winding paths, the dense thickets where shadows stayed longest. Her mother's voice rang in her head. Asterisk, don't ever go chasing into the woods alone, Elsie. Not after dark. Asterisk, but that was before her father died, before silence filled every room of their home, before she learned what real loss sounded like. I won't lose another one, she whispered. Elsie swung onto Dusty's back and kicked him into motion, the hooves thundering into the night as the storm grew behind them. Somewhere ahead, a predator carried off a newborn foal, and no one else would come looking. But she would, and she wouldn't stop. The forest swallowed them whole. Each step the old wolf took was laced with strain, its injured hind leg dragging slightly with every movement. The foal dangled from its jaws, limp but breathing, his small chest rising and falling with delicate rhythm. Rain soaked the undergrowth, muffling the sound of paw steps and hoofbeats alike. In the wolf's mind, this was not theft. It was survival. Its own kind had turned cold and cruel. Age had made it a liability, but this foal, this tiny creature, might be a final bargaining chip, a way back into a world that had cast it out. Whisper stirred. His eyes blinked open, the scent of damp fur and pine heavy in his nostrils. He whimpered once, confused. The warmth of his mother was gone, replaced by the sharp musk of predator. Instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, but weakness clung to his bones. He tried to move, and the motion made the wolf stop and readjust its grip. A few yards behind, hooves struck the softened earth with force. Elsie leaned low on Dusty's neck, her heart pounding harder than the storm overhead. She'd picked up the trail barely. The wolf had avoided wide paths, weaving through brambles and stone, but here and there, blood speckled the leaves. It wasn't the foal's. She knew that much. It was older, deeper, and came in uneven drops. A limp, she realized. The wolf was injured. That changed things. She guided Dusty down a slope thick with fern and broken branches, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Night had truly fallen now, and only the occasional flash of lightning gave shape to the trees. Still, she pressed forward, unwilling to let fear set the pace. Whisper whimpered again. The wolf paused near a creek swollen with rainwater. It laid the foal down under the thick branches of a spruce, panting heavily. The journey had cost it. Bones ached. Old wounds pulsed with heat. But it stood over the foal, watching him with eyes that held no hunger. Whisper trembled. His tiny legs shifted beneath him, unsure. He expected pain, death, but none came. Instead, the wolf lay beside him, curling its body around his to block out the cold wind. Elsie arrived at the ridge above moments later. She pulled Dusty to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion, crouching low to avoid being seen. Her breath caught in her throat. There, beneath the branches, lay the foal, and beside him the wolf. Not devouring, not even restraining. Just there, protecting. Confusion battled with urgency inside her. Everything she'd been taught, everything she believed about the wild, clashed with what she saw. This wasn't a predator guarding prey. This was something stranger, gentler. Still, she needed to act. She reached for the lasso coiled at her hip, fingers trembling. Dusty stepped quietly beside her, his ears tilted forward, alert but calm. One wrong move, and she could provoke something neither of them was ready for. The wolf had fought to get this far. It wouldn't surrender its strange cargo easily. But then her hand froze. The foal stirred and leaned against the wolf's fur, not out of terror, but warmth. The wolf didn't move. It blinked slowly, ears twitching at the sound of thunder, but otherwise remained still. Elsie lowered the rope. Who are you? She thought. And why him? Memories clawed at the edge of her mind. Her father's stories, told beside the fireplace on long winter nights. Tales of bonds formed between enemies in desperate times. Stories she had once dismissed as too poetic, too far-fetched. Now she wasn't so sure. Still crouched, she inched forward through the brush, watching the wolf's every breath. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she spoke, barely above a whisper. I don't want to hurt you. The wolf's head snapped toward her, eyes locked. A beat passed, then another. Whisper raised his head weakly, recognizing her voice, and gave a faint, broken whinny. The wolf didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. It simply lowered its head again and watched. Elsie stepped closer, carefully, slowly. The air between them was electric, the tension so sharp it made her skin prickle. She crouched just beyond reach, her eyes never leaving the wolf's. Rain fell steadily now, but none of them moved. A strange peace held the clearing together like invisible thread. Whisper tried to stand again and wobbled forward. Elsie extended her hand instinctively, palm up, but didn't touch him. "You're okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The wolf twitched but didn't interfere. Whisper touched her fingers with his nose. Something inside her cracked open. All at once, she understood. This wasn't just about a foal, or a chase through the dark. This was about something lost. The wolf, the foal herself, they were all fractured pieces of the same story. Survivors. Leftovers. Unwanted by the world, but still breathing. "I don't know why you took him," she said softly to the wolf, "but I think you saved him." The wolf blinked. Rain rolled down its muzzle. It didn't speak, of course, but in its silence, there was no threat, only fatigue. It stood slowly, favoring its injured leg, and backed a few paces into the shadows, watching her every move. Elsie waited, barely daring to breathe. The wolf didn't run. It didn't attack. It simply lay down again, watching from the edge of darkness, half in, half out of the light. Elsie turned back to Whisper and gently lifted him, cradling his trembling form in her arms. He was small, but his heartbeat was steady. She walked slowly toward Dusty, never taking her eyes off the wolf until she reached the saddle. Before mounting, she looked back one last time. "You don't have to be alone," she whispered. "Not forever." The wolf said nothing, but its ears twitched slightly, and it didn't look away. She climbed into the saddle, rain slick on her face, and held Whisper close. Dusty turned toward the trail, waiting for her signal. But she didn't move just yet. Somewhere in the distance, a low howl echoed, a sound not of hunger, but longing. Elsie looked ahead into the dark forest, the storm fading behind her. She knew this wasn't over. Something deeper stirred on the horizon, something that would test all of them. But for now, the foal was safe. And the wolf, somewhere in the shadows, was watching still. The fire cracked softly in the little stone circle Elsie had built just before dusk. Its glow flickered against the trunks of tall pines, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts. Whisper lay curled beside her, wrapped in a blanket stitched years ago by her mother, his breathing light but steady. His legs still trembled when he tried to stand, but there was more strength in him now. He had begun to trust her, to lift his head when she called his name. Every time he did, she felt something mend within herself. But the wolf hadn't left. It hovered at the edge of firelight, just beyond the visible, a hulking silhouette half swallowed by trees. Elsie could hear its breathing, not threatening, not close enough to provoke, just present, watching. She didn't sleep. Instead, she whispered stories to Whisper, old ranch tales, bits of her father's voice remembered and repurposed. She spoke about trust and survival, about broken things that still had value. The foal listened, or maybe he just found comfort in her voice. Either way, he stayed still, his head resting against her knee, as if he understood. Around midnight, the wolf crept a few feet closer. It didn't try to hide the limp anymore. Elsie turned slowly, made no sudden moves, and met its eyes. "I know you could have hurt him," she murmured, "but you didn't." The wolf didn't blink. Its eyes were tired, heavy, and beneath the wild exterior, there was something, grief maybe, something old and unfinished. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the last strip of jerky. She tossed it near the shadows. The wolf didn't move right away, but after several long minutes, it stepped forward, nose twitching, and took the offering in its jaws before retreating into the dark again. That was their first exchange. By morning, the storm had passed. Mist hung low over the forest floor, and the air smelled of damp bark and wet moss. Whisper tried to stand again, and this time, he stayed up longer than before. His legs bent, but they didn't buckle. Elsie grinned through tired eyes. "We'll get you back to your mama soon," she whispered. But something in the air shifted. Dusty snorted and backed up, ears flat. Elsie stood, heart leaping into her throat. Whisper dropped back to the ground, frightened by the sudden tension. She turned slowly toward the trees, hand resting on the handle of her rope. Eyes, dozens of them, low to the ground, glowing faintly in the morning haze. Another pack. The wolf emerged from the tree-line, standing between Elsie and the threat. Its posture was different now, tense, alert, unblinking. A low growl rumbled in its chest. Elsie didn't know what these wolves wanted. Maybe it was territory. Maybe they'd caught wind of the foal and came for an easy kill. But it was clear they weren't here to talk. The lead wolf stepped forward. It was younger, stronger, its silver coat unmarred by age or wounds. Its lip curled, and in one lightning-fast lunge, the old wolf met it head-on. The clearing erupted into chaos. Elsie screamed and dropped to shield Whisper with her body. Dusty reared and bolted, the rope slipping from the tree and trailing behind him into the woods. She couldn't look away. The wolves tore into each other with teeth and fury. The sound of snarling and yelps split the air. The old wolf fought with desperate strength. It moved like a creature that had nothing left to lose, throwing itself between the rival wolves and the foal with reckless abandon. But there were too many. 3, then 4, surrounded it, biting, dragging it down. Elsie grabbed a burning stick from the fire and swung it in the air, shouting, trying to drive them off. One lunged at her, and she swung hard, flames singing its fur. It yelped and fled back, but the others remained. Then, above it all, came a sound so strange it felt like a dream. A neigh, sharp, commanding, echoing through the forest. Another. Then hoofbeats. Crashing through the trees came Solana, her coat slick with sweat, mane tangled with leaves. Behind her was the stallion, and the rest of the Mustang herd. They surged into the clearing like a wave of fury and instinct. Solana charged the rival wolves first, rearing high and slamming her hooves into the dirt with a cry so fierce even Elsie recoiled. The stallion followed, biting and kicking. The wolves scattered. Some yelped and ran. Others growled but backed off. Within seconds, the forest floor cleared of every intruder. The old wolf lay in the mud, bleeding and still. Elsie didn't move. Her whole body shook. Whisper struggled out from beneath her arms, saw his mother, and gave a weak, wavering cry. Solana rushed forward, nuzzling him, circling protectively. She licked his face, checked his legs, his neck, as if ensuring he was still real. The stallion stood behind them, chest heaving, eyes wild. The reunion was silent, but thunderous. Elsie watched, tears running down her face unchecked. She wanted to reach out, to touch him one last time, but she knew the moment had passed. Whisper belonged here, with his kind, with his blood. She turned to the wolf. It was still breathing, barely. Its eyes flickered toward her, dull with pain but strangely calm. She knelt beside it, heart cracking in places she didn't know existed. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved us both." The wolf blinked once. Then it closed its eyes. Elsie didn't know if it would live. The forest had no promises. But it had given her this. One night, one battle, one miracle. She stood and backed away, giving Solana and her full space. The mare never looked at her, but somehow she didn't need to. From the edge of the forest, Dusty reappeared, limping but intact. She walked to him slowly, still trembling, and pulled herself into the saddle. Before riding away, she looked back one final time. Whisper stood between his mother's legs, wobbling but proud. He turned his head and looked at her. Just once. And that was enough. The sun broke through the trees in thin golden strands, casting dappled light over the damp forest floor. Mist still clung to the lower brush, curling around roots and hoof prints left in the mud. Elsie rode slowly through it all, the silence around her thick and reverent, as if the woods themselves were catching their breath after everything they had witnessed. Dusty's steps were measured, his ears forward, his pace calm now that the danger had passed. But inside Elsie, something stirred, grief. Yes, but also something lighter. A strange quiet pride. She reached the edge of a rocky ledge that overlooked the glade where the final moments had unfolded. Below, the Mustang herd grazed peacefully. Solana kept close to Whisper, her body brushing his as he teetered around her legs, gaining confidence with every shaky step. He had survived. Not just the storm, not just the wolf's jaws, but a gauntlet no creature his size should have had to endure. And he was still standing. Elsie slid off Dusty's back and sat on the ledge, her hands clasped tightly around her knees. She wanted to call out to him one last time, to say goodbye. But words wouldn't have reached him. Not now. Not after the way everything had changed. He belonged to the wild again, and the wild had accepted him. From the shadows of the far trees, a lone shape moved, slowly, gingerly. The wolf. Alive but changed. Its body was thinner now, bandaged in places with patches of missing fur and fresh scabs. Yet it walked, not like something defeated, but like something exhausted and proud. It didn't approach the herd. It didn't linger near the foal. It simply passed through the clearing's edge, casting one long look toward the mare and her child before vanishing between the trees once more. Elsie watched it go, and her chest tightened in a way she couldn't quite describe. That creature, feared by so many, had shown more courage, more sacrifice, than most people she knew. It had chosen mercy when it could have chosen blood. It had fought not for food, but for something else, something harder to name. Perhaps redemption, perhaps peace. Her fingers brushed the stitched leather bracelet on her wrist, one of the last things her father had given her. He used to say the world didn't divide cleanly into good and bad. It was full of choices, full of pain and second chances. You could learn everything you needed to know by watching how the wild ones lived. She smiled faintly now, understanding at last what he meant. The herd began to move again, drifting toward the base of the hills, whispering through the grass like water. Whisper trotted beside his mother, wobbling slightly, but proud, his head held higher than it had been before. He paused once, glancing up toward the ridge where she sat, and though she knew he couldn't see her clearly, it felt as if he sensed her there. She raised a hand in quiet farewell. He gave a soft, breathy whinny, almost like a sigh, and then turned to follow the herd. By noon, they were gone. Back at the ranch, everything felt smaller. The fences, the porch, the empty stall her father had once kept a horse in. She dismounted and led Dusty into the barn, brushing him down in silence. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms folded, unsure whether to scold her or cry. "I found him," Elsie said softly, before her mother could speak. Her mother stepped closer, eyes glistening. "The foal." Elsie nodded. "He's back with his herd. Safe." Her mother didn't ask for details. Not yet. She only wrapped her arms around her daughter and held her tight. In that moment, words weren't needed. What mattered had already been said. By the ride through the storm, by the bruises on Elsie's shins, by the spark in her eyes that hadn't been there in months. Later that week, Elsie returned to the overlooked trail with a notebook in hand. She sat beneath the same pine tree, its bark still bearing the marks from where she had tied Dusty's rope. She opened the notebook and began to write. Not just about the herd, but about everything. About the wolf. About the fight. About the fear and the mercy and the miracle she'd witnessed. She wrote until the sun slipped low, the pages filling with her father's voice, her own memories, and something new, understanding. When she finished, she set the notebook aside and stared into the horizon. In the distance, a howl echoed across the hills. Not close, not menacing. Just a sound, a declaration. Alive. Enduring. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Later that year, Elsie began volunteering at the local wildlife sanctuary. She helped care for injured animals, read to visiting children, and led trail tours where she told stories, not from books, but from the land itself. Her favorite one began simply. There was once a wolf who carried a foal through a storm. People didn't always believe her. But that didn't matter, because somewhere out there, in the thick woods beyond fences and rules, a small Mustang was running stronger each day. And perhaps, from a high ridge above, an old wolf watched him, just to be sure. Not all rescues came on horseback. Some came limping through shadows, teeth bared not to harm, but to shield. Some were quiet, lonely, unloved, but heroes all the same. And the girl who once thought she was too broken to help anyone now knew, sometimes, It only takes one impossible act of courage to rewrite the whole story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable tales of courage, trust, and the incredible bond between humans and horses.